Viridian, The Green Guide, written by Clouds, read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 61, Distraction. Shota grabbed his third cup of coffee, resisting the urge to chug it in one swallow. How did a top 10 hero just go missing? Sure, Shota didn't like Endeavor. How could he after the man had almost killed Viridian? But he was the number 2 hero. He couldn't just disappear. There were protocols. He had training. There was no logical reason why Endeavor should be able to just disappear for more than 3 days without anyone having any clue where he went. There had been talk among the police department for weeks now about bringing the Todoroki kids in and making sure that the rumors of child abuse that had been circulating since the New Year's disaster were false. But he hadn't been planning on those interviews pulling double duty as a potential murder investigation. Although, honestly, with what they'd uncovered so far, it wouldn't have surprised Shota in the least if one of those 3 kids had just snapped and killed their sperm donor. His money was currently on Natsu, though Fuyumi was also a likely candidate, considering it was always the quiet ones that were full of surprises. But Shota was the only one with a quirk powerful enough to be a legitimate threat to a pro hero. The other 2 could still have done it, but they would have had to get creative. Tsukashi, however, had just cleared all 3, which was how Shota had found himself involved in the whole mess. If the villain factory was looking for powerful quirks, Endeavors would certainly fit the bill, and if All for One really was the one behind the experiments, he might have the power and connections to explain how the number 2 hero had managed to vanish off the face of the earth. They obviously weren't hoping for that, considering that Endeavor was enough of a loose cannon without whatever modifications those monsters did to turn their victims into berserkers. But it was something they were going to need to prepare for in case it happened. Shota left the station and hit the rooftops. He knew it wasn't likely that he would be able to find a critical lead in the case tonight, but the sooner they closed down the villain factory, the better. The Hero Commission and Endeavor's agency were both working overtime to keep Endeavor's disappearance from the media, but Shota knew they'd only be able to manage that for so long. People were already starting to notice that Endeavor hadn't made any public appearances and were beginning to speculate as to why. So Shota gave it until the end of the week, at the latest, until the vultures managed to sink their claws into the whole story. This was going to be fun. He heard a scuffle a few alleys over and made his way there, jumping down when he saw Viridian fighting 2 villains while the victim cowered in the corner. They weren't very skilled, and Shota knew that the kid really wouldn't have any trouble taking them down by himself. But he still didn't waste any time dispatching the thug that was trying to sneak up on the kid, then quietly went after the other. If he could get rid of both villains before Viridian realized he was there, then he might just have a chance to grab him and take him in before the kid ran away again. He was already moving to attack the second villain when Viridian brought both of his pipes down on the guy's head and knocked him out. Years as a pro hero had taught Shota to roll with the punches, though, so he simply shifted his momentum into going after the kid instead. For half a second, he thought he would actually succeed in catching him, but Viridian's eyes widened at the last moment. He managed to roll away, grabbing his slingshot and letting a marble loose right at Shota's chest. He used his capture weapon to stop it, but when he'd recovered, the kid was already halfway up the wall. "Nice try, Eraser!" The kid gave him a bright smile as he leaned over the fire escape. Can you make sure the police get those guys?" Shota grunted and activated his comm to let the police department know he had criminals ready for pickup. "You can at least help tie the villains up before throwing in the towel, problem child." I'm not." The kid's cheeks puffed out indignantly. I'm not throwing in the towel, Eraserhead. I'm trying not to get arrested. Same difference, Shota responded cheekily, leaning down to zip tie the villain's wrists together. He could still feel the kid watching him, so he wasn't as rushed as he could have been as he turned to the victim. The police will be here in a few minutes, and these villains aren't going anywhere. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a vigilante to catch. He smiled as Viridian squawked above him and scrambled to get onto the rooftops. Shota followed quickly behind after receiving a confused nod from the victim. No fair! Viridian called over his shoulder. Who's throwing in the towel now? Still you, kid, Shota responded. We're offering you a shot at being a real hero. Just quit running and let us help you. I told you! I can't be a hero! Viridian yelled back. But I'm not trying to die anymore, so pick your battles. The easy admission made Shota stop in his tracks, and Viridian glanced behind him and stumbled to a confused stop as he realized Shota was no longer chasing him. Illogical problem child. He should have been using this chance to get away. Viridian looked at him nervously. Did I say something wrong? Shota blinked a few times as his brain finally caught up. No, kid, not at all. I'm happy for you. Congratulations? Viridian shuffled nervously in place, his voice getting quieter as he retreated back into a shell. I know it seems kind of sudden, but, there are a couple people I can't leave, you know? So, I'm gonna be better. Maybe this was his chance to finally get through to the kid and convince him to let him take him into custody. Problem child. I'm not gonna stop being a vigilante. Viridian cut him off quickly. I still want to help people, and I'm not going to give that up. But, I'll try to stop being so reckless, and I'm trying to communicate better. Did the notebook I gave you end up being useful? Shota sighed. If I say yes, are you going to keep digging into things you're not supposed to? Viridian smiled sheepishly. I'll probably do that anyway. Shota glared at him, but the problem child simply gave him a shit-eating grin, and he couldn't help being grateful. With how distraught the kid had been recently, it was nice to see him in a good mood. In the spirit of better communication, Shota said finally, looking around. Thankfully, he couldn't see or sense any other presences, so they would be fine to discuss the case, at least for now. There's something we're keeping out of the media for now, but I think the villain factory might be behind it. Since you refuse to keep your nose out of the case, you should probably be prepared. All right. Viridian looked confused and stepped a little closer. What is it? Shota glanced around again. The kid knew a lot about heroes, so it would be better to bank on that so that he could keep it vague, just in case anyone was listening. No one's seen Enji Todoroki in a few days. Enji Todoroki? Viridian's eyes widened. You mean Shota cut him off with a glare, and the kid slammed his mouth shut as he fully processed how bad it would be if and when that information got out. Oh, the kid breathed. And you think it's linked to Trigger? Shota shrugged. He's got a strong quirk, and the family didn't have anything to do with it. You have to admit it's likely. But why? The kid started muttering, and Shota could tell he was going to lose him into theorizing if he didn't say something soon. It seems so risky. They've been operating in the shadows, but this'll kid. Shota interrupted. You realize that most of the reason I'm telling you this is because if he shows up different, I want you to promise to run in the opposite direction. You said you're going to be less reckless? Well, let's put that resolution to the test. I would never! Viridian waved his hands frantically to emphasize the denial. I know I would lose that fight, no question. I'm pretty sure the only reason I'd ever fight him, especially if the villain factory got their hands on him, would be if he came after me directly. But I'm just a minor vigilante, so that's not gonna happen. All right, Shota said skeptically. Just remember, you promised. I won't forget, Viridian said seriously, then the problem child grinned. See you later, Eraserhead. Shota activated his quirk and grabbed his capture weapon, but the kid was already hopping onto the next roof. Get back here, kid. To his surprise, Viridian actually laughed as he ran away. The third glass in a row melted in Dobby's hand as he tried to polish it, and he would have thrown the buffing rag onto the counter in frustration if it hadn't already burned into ash. He knew that he hadn't been meant to overhear the conversation, but he'd just been trying to cool down after a long evening working a hot bar, keeping to the rooftops to avoid the inevitable stares and fear that came when normal people saw his scars. And, of course, as someone who had a side gig as an info broker, seeing a vigilante and a hero having a civil conversation had been enough to ignite his curiosity. But he almost wished he'd just gone back into the bar immediately. No one's seen Enji Todoroki in a few days. Most civilians wouldn't know that name, even though it was public record, because most people just didn't care. It was a lot more fun to cheer for Endeavor, after all. Dobby, however, knew the name a little too well. How could a kid ever forget his own old man, right? How such a big story was being kept out of the media was a miracle in and of itself. But Dobby wasn't going to be the one that broke it. No, he was more concerned about finding whoever had dared to kidnap his father when he was supposed to be the one to kill him. Eraserhead and Viridian hadn't dropped a whole lot of hints during their conversation, just something about a group called the Villain Factory and that they had connections to Trigger. But it would have to be enough because Dobby wasn't about to let a bunch of nobodies steal his revenge out from under him. And if he had to stop this villain factory himself, then so be it. End of chapter.